Richard Sterling didn't look at me when he fired me. He looked at his own reflection in the glass wall of his office, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a photo op. He slid a manila folder across the mahogany desk like it was a dinner bill he was generously picking up. "I'm cutting the fat, Ashley," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "Algorithmic logistics is a legacy cost. I'm not paying you to watch screens anymore when artificial intelligence can do it for free." Then came the smirk. It wasn't just a smile. It was a micro-expression of absolute unearned confidence. The look of a man who thinks he is trimming a bonsai tree, unaware he is cutting the brake line of a speeding car. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just took the folder and walked out. "Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I walked to my car, the gravel of the employee parking lot crunching under my heels. It was a gray Chicago afternoon, the kind where the sky feels heavy and low, pressing down on the industrial sprawl of the logistics center. I didn't look back at the glass tower. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my car door in a fit of rage. I simply sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the engine, and let the silence settle. Richard Sterling thought he had just trimmed a budget line. He thought he had dismissed a mid-level manager who stared at spreadsheets all day. That was the problem with men like Richard. They looked at a skyscraper and admired the windows, never giving a single thought to the steel beams buried in the concrete. He didn't know. He couldn't know. Because I had designed it that way. I wasn't just the head of algorithmic logistics. I was the architect and sole patent holder of the compliance encryption engine. It was a piece of proprietary code I had written 3 years ago before Vanguard even acquired my startup. It wasn't just software. It was the digital passport for every shipping container Vanguard moved. $850 million of cargo crossed international borders every single day because my code generated a unique encrypted compliance token that customs agencies in Rotterdam, Singapore, and Long Beach accepted as gospel. Without that token, a shipping container wasn't a product, it was a suspicious package, it was contraband. There is a concept in psychology called the Atlas complex. It refers to the burden of those who carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, performing a task so essential and doing it so flawlessly that the people around them forget the weight exists at all. They start to believe the sky stays up by magic. They think gravity is just a suggestion. I had been Vanguard's Atlas for 3 years. I had held up the sky, smoothing out every glitch, automating every crisis, making the impossible logistics of global trade look boring and easy. Richard looked at my department and didn't see a critical support structure. He saw a quiet room costing him money. He saw the sky floating and assumed he didn't need the Titan holding it up anymore. He had made a calculation based on visibility, not value. But there was a clause in my contract he hadn't bothered to read, buried under Section 14, Paragraph 3. The licensing agreement for the compliance encryption engine was contingent on my continued employment or a separate consulting fee. And to ensure security, to ensure no one could steal my life's work, I had installed a dead man's switch, a biometric rotation key. Every Sunday at midnight, the system required my fingerprint and a unique 24-character code generated on my private server to renew the encryption certificates for the next 168 hours. It wasn't a bug. It was a security feature. A feature that ensured if I was ever removed, the system would lock down to prevent unauthorized tampering. I looked at the digital clock on my dashboard. It was Friday, 4:45 p.m. The current key would expire in 55 hours. I didn't need to hack into their servers. I didn't need to launch a virus or delete files. I just needed to do exactly what Richard had asked me to do. I needed to leave. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the lot. Atlas was shrugging, and Richard was about to learn exactly how heavy the sky really was. Sunday night in my apartment was usually a time for meal prep and laundry. This Sunday, it was a vigil. At exactly 8 p.m., my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a push notification from my private server, a secure app I had built myself. The screen glowed with a single polite request: biometric key rotation required. 4 hours to expiration. Under normal circumstances, I would have opened my laptop, scanned my thumbprint, and generated the new 24-character hash key that would keep the global supply chain moving for another week. It would have taken me 30 seconds. But these were not normal circumstances. I sat on my couch, a mug of herbal tea in my hand, and just looked at the screen. I wasn't an employee of Vanguard Global Logistics anymore. My access badge was in a box by the door. My status in the HR system was terminated. If I were to log in now, if I were to generate that key, I would technically be an unauthorized user accessing corporate infrastructure. I would be hacking, and Richard Sterling had made it very clear that he wanted everything done by the book. He wanted to cut legacy costs. He wanted efficiency. So I decided to be the most efficient ex-employee in history. I decided to do absolutely nothing. At 9:30, another notification popped up. It was an automated email from Richard. The body of the email was a generic template reminding me to return my laptop badge and parking pass to security by noon on Monday. It warned that failure to return company property would result in the cost being deducted from my final severance check. I almost laughed out loud in the quiet of my living room. He was worried about a $2,000 laptop. He was threatening me over a plastic parking pass. Meanwhile, the digital foundation of his entire operation was screaming for attention, counting down the minutes until it suffocated. I didn't reply. I simply swiped the notification away and deleted the email. I wasn't being vindictive. This wasn't revenge. It was malicious compliance in its purest form. He had fired the architect. He didn't get to keep the architecture. I watched the digital clock on my phone screen. 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 11:59. The seconds ticked away with a rhythmic, inevitable precision. At midnight exactly, the notification on my server app changed. The polite request for a biometric key vanished. It was replaced by a red banner that read, "Rotation failed. Dead man's switch, engaged. Protocol 0 initiated." Deep in the server farms that hosted Vanguard's data, the compliance encryption engine interpreted the silence as a security breach. It assumed that because the biometric authorization hadn't arrived, the system had been compromised or the operator was incapacitated. To protect the integrity of the shipping data, it did exactly what I had programmed it to do. It locked the doors. It scrambled the outgoing codes. It shut down. I didn't feel a surge of adrenaline. I didn't feel panic. I felt a strange, cold sense of peace. The weight was gone. The sky was no longer my problem. I turned off my phone, placed it face down on the table, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in 3 years. Monday mornings at Vanguard Global Logistics usually sounded like a riot in a stock exchange. It was a cacophony of shouting brokers, ringing phones, and the hum of server racks processing terabytes of data. It was the sound of money moving. But this Monday, my former assistant Elena told me later, the floor didn't sound like money. It sounded like a tomb. There is a specific quality to the silence in a logistics center when the data stops flowing. It isn't peaceful, it is heavy. It presses against your eardrums, thick with panic and the sudden horrifying realization that the machine has stopped. At 8 a.m., sharp, the massive digital wall, we called the big board, which tracked every ship, plane, and truck in the fleet, didn't update. It didn't flicker. It simply froze. A sea of green status indicators blinked once, then turned a uniform, unblinking crimson. Protocol 0 had kicked in. The compliance encryption engine had revoked every active certificate. To the automated systems at Customs and Border Protection, Vanguard wasn't a logistics giant anymore. It was a ghost. Richard Sterling strolled onto the trading floor at 8:15, holding a latte, expecting to see the efficiency of his new streamlined operation. Instead, he walked into a mausoleum. 300 brokers stood at their desks, headsets around their necks, staring at blank monitors. The phones weren't ringing because the routing system had locked them out. The printers were silent. The air conditioning hummed loud and intrusive in the vacuum of activity. Richard didn't understand what he was looking at. He didn't see a security lockdown. He saw a workforce refusing to work. He stormed toward the IT pit, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Why aren't the screens moving?" he shouted, his voice cracking in the quiet. "Why aren't you people working?" A junior sysadmin, a kid I had hired straight out of college, tried to explain. "The system isn't handshaking, sir," he stammered. "We're getting a certificate revoked error. It's asking for a biometric override." Richard didn't listen. He slammed his hand on the desk. "Then bypass it, use the AI. I paid millions for that software, make it work. But you can't bypass a dead man's switch with a buzzword. You can't negotiate with code." Richard grabbed a desk phone and dialed my old extension, likely intending to scream at me to fix the glitch he believed I had caused. He stood there, receiver pressed to his ear, listening to the hollow, endless ring of a phone in an empty cubicle. He looked at the rows of terrified employees, at the red screens, at the silent phones. He blamed the lazy staff. He blamed the legacy hardware. He blamed everything but the mirror. He had no idea that the building wasn't just having a technical difficulty. It was burning down around him, and he was the one who had thrown away the fire extinguisher. By noon, the damage wasn't just inside the building, it was global. The port of Rotterdam had flagged 3 Vanguard container ships as non-compliant, refusing to let them dock. In Singapore, a fleet of air cargo planes was grounded on the tarmac, racking up fees by the minute, and in Long Beach the automated cranes simply stopped lifting. Without the encrypted token from my engine, the entire international logistics network treated Vanguard's cargo as radioactive. $850 million of inventory, electronics, pharmaceuticals, auto parts was frozen in transit. Richard was in the executive conference room, sweating through his expensive shirt. He had IT on speakerphones screaming at them to reboot the server as if this were a Wi-Fi router in a coffee shop. That was when Elena, the general counsel, burst in. She looked pale, clutching a sheaf of papers like a shield. "It's not a bug, Richard," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "It's not a hack. It's a license." She threw the contract on the table. "You fired the patent holder. The software isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It's waiting for her authorization." Richard stared at the contract, the blood draining from his face. "What do you mean patent holder? She worked here, she signed a standard IP agreement." "No, she didn't," Elena countered. "She brought the code with her when we acquired her startup. She retained the rights. We only lease it. And the lease requires weekly biometric renewal by the owner. We are currently operating illegally. Every container moving right now is a violation of international trade law." Richard sank into his chair. "Call her," he whispered. "Get her on the phone. Tell her to fix it. Tell her I'll authorize overtime." They tried. My phone rang for an hour straight. I watched it vibrate on my kitchen counter while I made a sandwich. I wasn't being cruel. I was being unavailable. I was letting the reality of their situation sink in. When I finally picked up on the 17th call, it was Elena. She sounded like she was on the verge of tears. "Ashley, please," she begged. "The board is involved. Customs is threatening to seize the ships. Just tell us what you want." I took a bite of my sandwich, chewed slowly, and swallowed. "I want a meeting," I said. "In 1 hour. And not at the office. I'll send you the address." The address I sent them wasn't for a coffee shop or a lawyer's office. It was for a private conference room at the Palmer House Hilton, a historic hotel downtown known for its ornate gilded lobby and quiet discretion. I arrived early, set up my laptop, and waited. When Richard walked in, flanked by Elena and the board chairman Silas Vance, he looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 4 hours. His tie was loose, his hair was disheveled, and the arrogance that had defined him on Friday was gone, replaced by a frantic, sweaty desperation. "Ashley," Richard started moving toward me with his hands out like he was trying to calm a spooked horse. "This has gone too far. Just give us the code. We can talk about your severance later." I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I just looked at him. "There is no severance, Richard," I said. "I'm not an employee. I'm a vendor. And my price just went up." Silas Vance, a man who had built his fortune on being the smartest person in the room, sat down at the head of the table. He ignored Richard. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We are losing $35 million an hour. Our legal team tells me we have grounds to sue you for extortion." I slid a document across the polished wood table. It wasn't a resignation letter. It was a consulting and licensing agreement drafted by my lawyer over the weekend. "You can try to sue," I said. "But discovery will show that your CIO fired the patent holder without checking the IP registry. It will show that he ignored automated warnings, and while we're in court your cargo will sit in customs, your clients will leave, your stock will tank. Or you can sign this." Silas picked up the contract. He read the numbers. His eyebrows shot up. $25 million, he read aloud. "For a 1-year, non-exclusive license. That's extortion." "It's the cost of doing business," I corrected. "It's the cost of the biometric key. It's the cost of my silence about how close you came to total collapse. And it's the cost of teaching Richard here a lesson about the value of the people he thinks are invisible." Richard sputtered. "This is insane. You can't do this. I built this department." "No, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through his bluster. "You bought the furniture, I built the house, and now I'm changing the locks." Richard turned to Silas, looking for support, but the chairman wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the contract. He signed the document with a flourish and slid it back to me. Then he turned to Richard. "You're fired," he said. "Get out." Richard looked like he'd been slapped. He opened his mouth to argue, but 2 security guards were already entering the room. He didn't leave with dignity. He left shouting about lawyers and wrongful termination, his voice echoing down the hallway until the heavy doors swung shut, sealing out the noise. Silas Vance watched him go, then turned his attention back to the table. He picked up the signed contract, examining it one last time before sliding it toward me. "Why him?" Silas asked quietly. "Why did he fire you?" I folded my hands on the table. "Because he thought I was a cost, not an asset. He thought automation meant he didn't need architects. And he was wrong." Silas nodded slowly. "He was stealing, you know." I blinked. "What? I audited his department this morning while we were waiting for you to pick up the phone. The AI project he claimed would replace your team, it didn't exist. He was funneling the budget into a shell company. He fired you to free up cash flow for his embezzlement." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just incompetence, it was greed. He hadn't just underestimated me. He had tried to rob the company blind and use my firing as the cover story. The anger I'd been holding onto finally broke, replaced by a cold, hard satisfaction. He was gone. And he wasn't just fired. He was facing criminal charges. Silas handed me the check. $25 million. It was a staggering amount of money, more than I could have earned in 10 lifetimes at my old salary, but as I held the slip of paper, I realized it wasn't just money, it was validation. It was an apology written in zeros. I opened my laptop. I placed my thumb on the scanner. The system verified my identity. I typed in the 24-character hash key that had been sitting on my private server since Sunday night. I hit enter. On the wall of the conference room, a monitor showed the status of the global network. One by one, the red indicators flickered and turned green. The port of Rotterdam accepted the certificates. The planes in Singapore were cleared for takeoff. The cranes in Long Beach started moving again. The world exhaled. I closed my laptop and stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," I said. Silas looked at me with a strange expression, something like respect mixed with regret. "Miss Bennett, if you ever want your old job back." I smiled. "No thank you. I have other plans." I didn't go back to Vanguard. Not even to pack my desk. I sent Elena a list of items to ship to me and told her to keep the rest. A week later, the check cleared. $25 million. I stared at the balance in my account, feeling a sense of vertigo. It was enough money to disappear. To buy an island. To never work another day in my life. But I wasn't done working. I was just done working for people who didn't understand the value of a foundation. I launched Sovereign Systems 3 months later. We weren't a flashy startup. We didn't have a foosball table or a kombucha tap in the break room. We built critical infrastructure for the logistics industry. Secure, redundant, unbreakable systems designed by people who knew exactly how fragile the world really was. My first hires were Elena and the junior sysadmin Richard had screamed at. I offered them double their Vanguard salaries and equity. They accepted before I finished the sentence. 6 months in, we were profitable. A year in, we were essential. I stood in my office one evening, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights glittered like a circuit board, a vast, complex network of movement and data. I thought about Richard currently awaiting trial for wire fraud. I thought about the silence of that Monday morning, the terrifying power of simply stopping. I wasn't the invisible Atlas anymore. I had put down the sky and built my own world, one where the pillars were visible, valued, and sovereign. If you've ever been the one doing the work while someone else took the credit, share this story. Let's remind the world that you can't fire the foundation and expect the house to stand.